Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. In this week's episode, I'm joined by fellow Let's Recover coach Louisa to discuss eating after an eating disorder. How is eating like when you come out on the other side? And we wanted to have this conversation because for so many people in an eating disorder, including us when we had our eating disorders, it was incredibly hard to imagine ever being recovered, and eating intuitively can sometimes feel like this weird buzzword. Like, okay, but what does it actually mean? And do you really get fully free? Is the eating disorder always going to be there, but you just learn to ignore it? How does it even work? So some of the topics that we discuss in this episode include the transition from meal plan to intuitive eating, binge urges and breaking out of binge restrict cycles, and if the urge to binge ever really goes away. And cravings, how does cravings shift during your eating disorder, in recovery, and then after recovery? We talk about things such as having very specific cravings or not craving fruit and vegetables, if that is something that comes back later. We talk about intuitive eating and what it really is and what it isn't. Some misconceptions that we used to have about intuitive eating during our eating disorders and in our recoveries versus what we have experienced now as intuitive eaters and what we see in our client work. We also talk about things like comparison, food focus, food noise, and overall learning to trust your body again. I hope you will enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. Let's get into it. All right. I'm joined here with Louisa. Hi, Louisa. Thank you for joining us on this episode.
Hi, Maya. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So today we are going to talk a bit about what eating is like for us now as people who are fully recovered. And we're going to talk a bit about maybe some misconceptions that we used to have around what intuitive eating is, what eating is like when someone has moved away from their eating disorder, and just share a bit about our experiences and hopefully offer a bit of hope that it is possible to come out on the other side.
Yeah, I think it's a super important topic to cover because I hear a lot from my clients that they're worried or that they're wondering, will this always be like this? Will certain thoughts always be there? Will certain needs always be there? And I think it's important to discuss this or talk about it and see how it is on the other side. I always compare this, I use this metaphor with recovery, that it's this super scary long bridge with a lot of holes, and there's like this scary jungle underneath, and you're on this cliff, on this one side of the cliff, and it's not fun here. It's the eating disorder side, but you're familiar with the side and you don't know what's on the other side, but you heard it's a lot better. Everybody says it's a lot better and easier and happier. But you haven't experienced it for yourself and you still have to cross a scary bridge. So I think talking about that, the other side is what the other side is a little bit, and what we thought the other side was, is hopefully helpful.
Yeah, exactly that. I think that when you are in the depths of your eating disorder, even when you are in recovery, everything feels quite scary. It feels unknown, and you don't really know what's on the other side. Like you said, like the reviews are good from the other side. You've heard that apparently it's worth it. Apparently recovery is worth it, and you should keep going. But you haven't really felt it yet yourself. And it's interesting for me when I look back at my own recovery and the things that I used to believe about what it's like to be recovered and to be a so-called intuitive eater versus what it actually is like now when I am a recovered person. And I think one thing that I used to believe and that I often see a lot of clients believe is that being an intuitive eater is about focusing a lot on your hunger, right? It's about constantly sitting there and analyzing, am I really hungry? Am I really full? I remember when I was in treatment and I was on the meal plan, I was always a bit scared of coming to that phase of moving away from the meal plan, because I was like, oh my God, then I have to constantly obsess and focus on, am I hungry? Am I not hungry? And I didn't realize just how natural that transition was going to be and how I would be able to like lean into what my body's telling me. Because to me, that just sounded like some kind of cheesy metaphor. I was like, oh, guys, you're not really listening to your bodies, are you? Like, I had such a hard time ever imagining that. And I'm wondering with you, Louisa, as well, did you have any, maybe some perceptions or beliefs about what it's like to be recovered in terms of hunger, appetite, quote unquote, intuitive eating, that you used to believe one thing and now you believe something different?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it is very dependent on where I was in my recovery because I went through different phases. I was restricting a lot. I was binging, I was purging in my eating disorder. And during, for example, my clinic stays when I was inpatient or outpatient and was on a very strict meal plan, I had those same thoughts. I was like, okay, this is a really helpful support right now, but is it ever going to be natural? To the point that I don't have to overthink this. And this was, like my life was just turning around food. That was basically the most important thing in my life back then. So imagining that something else is more important and that food becomes secondary and just a necessity and just something that naturally fits into your day, doesn't have to be planned. It was really hard for me to believe, just because back then it was such an important topic for me. And for me, eating becomes easier with eating, and the food noise also reduces a lot with refeeding and restoring weight. And that was hard for me to believe, that this food noise ever goes down. The other thing I experienced in my, like where I was binging a lot, that not everybody in the world doesn't always want to binge. I didn't understand this. I was like, how does a person stop eating and wants to stop eating and is just satisfied? I think the feeling of just being satisfied with a meal and being able to step away and focusing on something else in their life, that thought was really hard for me to grasp. Turns out, going through recovery and being on this other side of the bridge and, just restoring my body and refeeding my body, this food noise decreased all the way. And food is a secondary thing in my life. I mean, I still focus on eating and I'm eating 3 times a day plus snacks, but it's definitely something that is not this main priority in my life anymore.
Yeah, exactly that. And the point you make about the binges is so important and relevant here, because I also used to believe similar things, that getting out of the cycle was about resisting the urges. I see this a lot with clients where they come to me with binge restrict cycles or binge purge cycles, and they almost expect a bit that our work will be around them learning to suppress the urges. That if we just do enough mindfulness, they will learn to not to give in to these urges that everyone has all the time. And I was like, no, actually, I have good news for you. You're going to come to a point, if you go through recovery, where you don't have constant urges to binge all the time. So I think that for me was a thing I can relate to what you said there, that I used to think that everyone, if they were just given free realms, that everyone just wanted to binge all the time. And now, for me now, the thought of binging, it just doesn't seem like a tempting thing to do. Not because I'm like, oh, I shouldn't do it, I feel bad doing it. I was like, no, I just don't have the urge to do it.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, even if somebody gave me free permission to binge, no calorie impact, no food, no body result, like nothing, no impact on anything. There would be no inch of my body that actually wants to go through with it. I think the desire and the adrenaline spike you will get from it, kind of the excitement around food, is just gone. Food is now a constant part of my life.
Yeah.
And also all kinds of foods are a part of my life. There's no, oh, I can't eat donuts or I can't eat certain things. Everything is included, so there's no need to binge on those things.
And binging, it's an important point to get forward as well, that there is a difference between binging and occasional overeating. Like, for example, on Christmas Eve, yes, I will eat more than what I usually do at dinner, just because it's kind of part of the of the setting. You know, it's a food that it's like typical Christmas food. It's not one that I get all the time, but I won't binge, right? So I think this is another thing to say, that being recovered may mean that you have times where you eat a bit more than maybe what you felt completely hungry for. That is also a normal part of it. But it's not that you constantly have urges to do so. I don't walk up to every dinner I have and I'm like, I have an urge to overeat and I have to stop myself not to do it. My body naturally regulates things that I used to think it wasn't really capable of regulating.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. Occasional overeating is definitely part of a normal relationship with eating.
For sure, for sure. And maybe we could talk a bit more about our relationship with food now, and how has it shifted from your relationship with food, not just during your eating disorder, but also during different stages of your recovery?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I experienced extreme hunger pretty early in my recovery once I went all in. And during that phase, I was interested in all kinds of processed foods and foods high in fat, high in sugar, everything. I restricted my whole eating disorder. The last thing I wanted is a salad or a piece of fruit or a piece of vegetables. Like, I remember this point very well and bring this up a lot because my husband was like, hey, can we make some rice bowls with maybe some chicken and veggies? I was like, no. Can we eat some lasagna or some pizza or something instead? And I thought back then, I was like, okay, this is kind of a little scary because do I ever want fruit or vegetables again? Or am I the person who wants just processed foods and sugar and all of those things the whole time? And it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was scary, but I trusted the process. I made a little agreement with myself in the beginning that I'm just gonna stick with the process and trying to trust it as much as possible. And at one point, I will remember this day to the rest of my life because I went to the grocery store. I always just walked right past the vegetable and fruit aisle. And I walked past the apples and I was like, oh my God, those apples look incredible. I want an apple. And it kind of stuck with me because from that point, it slowly just came back. And I think that is just like it was a very comfortable feeling or comforting feeling for me that I realized, okay, my body is able to ask for its needs. I don't have to tell my body what it needs. It's telling me what it needs. And I can listen. I don't have to overrule the needs. So that was probably the biggest change from recovery versus or towards the start of intuitive eating. I think it's super important to mention that intuitive eating is the last stage of recovery and that it's a lot of mechanical eating until then and structured eating until you actually get to the point. But it gave me hope that intuitive eating is possible and what intuitive eating actually feels like. What you mentioned in the beginning too, that intuitive eating doesn't mean this, I'm basically sitting there all mindful and thinking about what does my body need right now. You know, you just know. And
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a good example. The thing you mentioned with your cravings changing as recovery progresses. I think this is something that freaks people out because they start recovery. And yes, naturally, forbidden fruits taste the sweetest, as they say. The foods that you've been banning yourself from are going to be the foods that's going to be often the most tempting. And also, when you're coming from having been in an energetic deficit, your body's going to want to prioritize foods that give you a quick and easy source of energy. But what often happens then is people start recovery and they noticing those are the foods they're gravitating towards. And then they confuse being in recovery for being recovered. And they think, oh, so this is my true colors coming through. This is how I want to eat if I give myself no restrictions. I'm just hungry all the time and all I want is processed foods. Well, that can't be good for me long term. And then they freak out. But it's so important what you said there, that you kind of trusted the process and gave it time. And then naturally it came to you that your cravings started diversifying. That it was not that you were like, oh my God, I really need to start craving apples again. But instead it was you being in the shop and being like, ooh, that looks good. And I've worked with so many clients when they come to a point of, oh, wow, I had my first vegetable cravings in months. What on earth was going on? Your body will eventually diversify its cravings, but only when it can sense that it's safe to do so.
Yeah, and I think a super important point to add is that it wasn't easy to trust the process. That it's not just like, oh, I trusted the process. Like, believe me, this was something I had a lot of great support with, and I was struggling with from time to time. I was like, what is going on? Like, I thought I'm this person who eats a lot of vegetables, etc. But exactly what you said, don't confuse going through recovered with being recovered, and how being recovered looks like. Such an important point.
Yeah, exactly. And another good point you made there was around intuitive eating, because intuitive eating is something I think so many people have misconceptions around what it really means. And I think the biggest misconception I see amongst clients, and also a bit on what I used to think, is that intuitive eating means more focus on food, more thinking about food, more scanning your body nonstop. And don't get me wrong, I think there are some branches of intuitive eating that kind of normalizes what I would instead call more intuitive restriction, where the goal is essentially to get as little as possible food in and still feel satisfied. That is not real intuitive eating. That is restriction just rebranded. Intuitive eating is about thinking less about food, less analyzing your hunger nonstop. But it is true that it is something that may not be happening immediately in recovery. Rather, it's something that may happen a little bit later down the line. And for some people, when they are in recovery, they need to eat a bit more structured. For me personally, I had to be very structured in my recovery. I had to push myself to eat a lot more than what my body actually felt like it needed and wanted, just because that's what I needed to restore weight. So it's so important to say that just because intuitive eating may feel hard for some people doesn't mean that it is impossible to do forever.
It takes time. And it's not just that one day where you're suddenly recovered and everything suddenly is intuitive. It's a blurry line. It's a process. I always tell my clients it's more important, like it's basically 2 steps ahead, 1 step back. It's important to screen the way of you eating once in a while, not hyper focus anymore after recovery, but like still have an eye on it and just have a little bit of like a red flag checklist and see what is going on. Like, am I still on track? Am I still eating freely? For everybody, it's different how long this phase is. I think one other huge shift for me was the amount of time I spent thinking about food and spending preparing food, restricting the whole day until I ate at night, and spending so much time preparing it and eating it. And my life just circled around food. And I feel like that was the biggest shift when it comes to this, that right now it's more, I mean, I'm thinking a lot of food because I have to feed my son, I have to feed my family, but it's more, okay, let's get this done with and let's focus on it. And my goal, to be completely honest, and people recover differently, and some people have a lot of fun cooking even after recovery. I'm a person who, and I think you can you can relate, but I'm a person who just wants to be in and out of the kitchen as quick as possible and make it the least effort as possible. That was a big change for me too. And comparing with others.
Yeah, true intuitive eating is about thinking about food less, not more. So, for example, right before the podcast recording we're doing, I didn't have that much time and I was hungry, so I just needed to grab something quick. And I didn't go into the kitchen and ask myself, okay, I need to really think, what do I really, really crave right now, and overanalyze and ruminate. I was just like, boom, cereal, quick, just ate it without being super present in the moment. I was like setting up a few things and going through some emails and eating on the side. And then I realized, oh, actually, I just had my cereal. Oh, I'm still hungry. And I just went and had another cereal without thinking about it. No part of me was like, oh, I need to check the serving size, which would be like probably like a third of what a bowl of cereal actually is for me. And some may say, oh, that's not intuitive eating. But I would say that is actually intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is when eating fits into your life and you're not overly focused on it. And don't get me wrong, it's completely fine to have times where you go to the kitchen and you make yourself a really nice meal and you're really tasting it. I do that sometimes too. I know me and my partner are going to make a delicious dinner tonight that we're really going to enjoy, take some time making, but that is not like the core focus of my life. And I can also just sometimes eat to live rather than living to eat in a way.
Yeah, 100%. I agree on that.
And you mentioned something there around comparison. I would love to hear a bit more how the comparison element has shifted for you as well.
Yeah, I just threw in that point. I just thought of it because I was very focused on comparing myself to everything and everybody that was around me. And I could have probably told you exactly what everybody around me ate that day, how much, at what time. I definitely was very focused on how does everybody look around me. Did they lose weight? Did they gain weight? Just as an example. But point is that I was very aware of everybody else and what everybody else around me was doing. That has changed with recovery. Right now, I couldn't tell you how much. I mean, I cooked dinner, so I know what we ate last night, but I don't know how much everybody ate of it. When we order food, it's not that I have to check the order to see what does everybody else eat. I don't care, to be bland, like it's just not this high priority anymore. And I think that is such an important realization for me in recovery, because I was always worried, oh man, what does people think if I only eat processed food for a while? What if people see my weight gain? How would people feel about me eating the whole bowl of something, And realizing people who have an eating disorder are very hyper-focused on what everybody else is doing. People without eating disorders don't have this. And it was really hard for me to believe this, because this is what my brain was wired to. But now I understand this, because now I don't have this tunnel vision anymore. And realizing other people don't focus on what you're eating, on how your body looks, etc., as much as somebody with an eating disorder does. And this is something I remind my clients a lot of.
That's an important point, because when you have an eating disorder, your brain is wired to see the world one way. And it can be a quick short circuit in the brain to then assume that's how everyone else sees the world. So if you are programmed by malnutrition to be really focused on what everyone else is eating and comparing your food with them or your body with them, you will then naturally assume, well, this is just the default human condition, isn't it? This is just how everyone thinks. And if you're judging your own food intake, you may then think, well, other people are judging me. So there's a lot of projection going on in eating disorders. And comparison with food, comparison with bodies, you mentioned as well. And me and Louisa did an episode already around body image and how we relate to our bodies as recovered people versus how it was like during eating disorder and recovery. So also check out that episode as well. I think a bit of a theme I took away from what you were saying is that there is a reduction in food noise. And I think food noise has become such a confusing term to a lot of people. A lot of times people think food noise is just about, oh, I want to eat. But a lot of times it's just the amount of time you spend thinking about food, planning food, looking up like, oh, if you're going to a restaurant, are you researching the restaurant, researching the menu, planning how it's going to fit your calorie budget? That constant thing of food and calories always going in your head. And food noise is that thing that there is such a massive reduction in. That doesn't mean that I don't think about food. That doesn't mean that I don't plan. That doesn't mean that I can't look forward to, for example, a nice dinner out. But it's just not at the forefront of my mind anymore. Whilst during my eating disorder, I would dream about food. It would be nonstop on my brain, which then reinforced this idea that I had that I was just extremely food obsessed and out of control around food if I let go of the control that I was holding.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important, like with the mental hunger and your brain constantly circling around food and basically the cheap way of your body sending hunger cues, basically telling you over and over again, like, hey, please go eat. I think it's important to mention that having food noise once in a while is also a very normal part of life after recovery. For example, when we go out for a meal and we are hungry because it's dinner time or lunchtime and everybody around us already has food and we're still waiting for our food, the conversation naturally focuses on food. It's, in theory, that is mental hunger too. Having food noise once in a while after recovery is also very normal. I know people who are going through eating disorder recovery are frequently worried about doing a recovery wrong or doing something wrong afterwards. If we're planning a big meal or are excited about a meal or something, that is just something very normal of day-to-day life.
Yes, I think that's important because sometimes people with eating disorders can end up in a bit of like a black and white thinking around certain recovery concepts. Thinking about food is a normal part of being recovered, like just like you think about sleep, like just you think about a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But it's more that when you are no longer in a deficit, when you're no longer psychologically restricting yourself as well, you will start noticing that it takes up less and less time. And some people in recovery may notice that that can reach an extreme as well, where I work with people where they experience a bit of an appetite loss. I recently did an episode about appetite loss specifically after all in recovery and how people may manage that. So also sometimes people may experience that temporarily they go through a stage in recovery where food is just very not interesting and where appetite is quite low. And it's important also not to lean so hard into intuitive eating during this stage that you end up in a deficit, right? So like you, Louisa, said earlier, sometimes having a bit of a check-in with yourself, like, am I eating enough? Am I actually listening to my, what my body's telling me it needs? But you can do that without doing it in a rumination way, because that's often what we see during eating disorder, where it becomes this anxiety-ridden project that you feel like you need to do perfectly, and where you think if you just think enough and analyze enough, you'll find, quote unquote, the perfect way of eating. And if there's one thing to take away from this episode, is that eating becomes more relaxed and more intuitive with time and with recovery. But it doesn't happen overnight, and you're going to have to go through a stage where you're feeling like you're doing everything wrong and oh my God, and you're losing control, all of that. It's part of the process to get out the other side. It's like crossing that bridge that Louisa mentioned. You're probably going to be scared when you cross the bridge, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't cross it.
I was about to say, I think it's a very important part of recovery, being scared. We know this is exactly when change is happening, but recovery is messy. Recovery is not a linear line. It's basically back and forth, up and down. And that means you're doing something right and not something wrong. You just mentioned trust as well. And I think that was like a big realization for me too, that I had to learn how to trust my body, but I realized it's a two-way street. And basically like building a new relationship, my body also has to learn to trust me. And I have to constantly give my body reason to trust me. It's basically like meeting a person on the street and you're saying like, hey, like, trust me. That person won't trust you immediately. You kind of have to show that person over and over again, you're trustworthy. So it's the same with your body. It's kind of, your body will eventually show you that you can trust your body, but vice versa. So it's a two-way street.
Exactly. Building trust with your body and your hunger fullness cues is not something you do as an intellectual exercise. It's not something you just tell your body a very convincing argument, oh, just trust me. And then your body's like, okay, cool. It is something that you create throughout time and experience, through showing your body that enough food is coming in, all foods are available. It is something you have to show your body through repeated behavioral change. And I say this because a lot of times I work with clients where they think that it is an intellectual exercise. They think it's something they can do if they just research enough, if they just think enough, if they just analyze themselves enough. But it's like, no, you have to show your body through repeated experience, through fueling it, that you are trustworthy, that you're going to take care of it, that it's safe to turn down this food noise. Because if you're starving your body, like what would your body switch off a basic survival mechanism that is meant to drive you towards food?
Yeah, and my brain does think we're starving right now, and I have to prove it wrong. I have to prove it and show it over and over again that we are not starving right now. There's no famine. There's a fridge full of food.
Exactly. And me and Louisa also will hopefully do an episode where we talk more about the exercise part as well, and a bit on how to build that kind of trust as well. But that's, of course, we won't get into this now, but just to stay on topic. And I think one thing I also hear a lot from people that they're confused about around intuitive eating and being recovered is, do you have any kind of structure? Do you kind of just always just sit there and think, what do I want to eat? When do I want to eat? How do I want to eat? And I know for myself that when I wake up in the morning, I have breakfast. I don't really think too much. am I hungry for breakfast? I just think it's morning, it's food time, I'm going to eat breakfast and then I get to work, rather than being like, okay, what do I want? When do I want it? But then there are other times where I maybe just suddenly be like, well, I crave something, I'll go grab it. But I do still have a baseline structure, but it's very flexible and it revolves around my life rather than me revolving my life around food. But in recovery, I temporarily actually had to kind of revolve my life around my meal plan a little bit just to make sure I got enough. Because I know for myself, if I hadn't done that, that would have been a way for my eating disorder to justify restriction. Like, oh, whoopsie, I didn't have time for my snack. Well, it happens. So that's another point I kind of want to get forward, that again, eating in recovery versus as a recovered person is going to be very different. And yeah, I would like to hear about your thoughts, Louisa, as well. What are your thoughts on the thing of intuitive eating, flexibility, structure, listening to hunger?
Okay, so I think it's very similar to what you just said as well. And this is kind of my point from earlier as well, that intuitive eating comes last in recovery. Like, I missed my snack. Like, oopsie, I'm not going to eat it. It's just not helpful in recovery. It's just more helpful to kind of actually stick with the structure. If you miss your snack, it's never too late to eat it kind of deal.
Yeah, exactly. And a key shift, I know that we've discussed this before, Louisa, is like how we view food and calories, not as this thing to avoid and get as little as possible out of in a way, but instead seeing it as cliche as it sounds, like fuel to get through the day, right? Like, for example, I like to have quite a bit of peanut butter with my breakfast, and I deliberately add quite a bit of it because, yes, it is higher in calories, it has fats, and it keeps me full. And I know that if I'm going to go and I'm going to do my sessions or whatever else I got going for the day, I want to be satiated. Whilst before, my line of thinking would have been, oh, peanut butter, it's energy dense. You don't get as much out of your calories as possible. And at the same time as I was thinking that during my eating disorder, I would be hungry all the time. So I didn't quite understand that I am actually getting quite a lot out of that peanut butter, because if I've had times where I, for example, ran out of the peanut butter and had the same meal but without peanut butter, I notice I get hungrier quicker. And that's fine. I'll just eat quicker. But I kind of see food in a more functional way. And I trust that my body knows when it's getting something high calorie or low calorie. And I have experienced the difference when I, for example, have a dinner that's a bit lighter or a dinner that it's a bit more satiating, that my body knows the difference. So I think this is the thing, like there isn't that fear of calories. And that used to be such a thing for me, where fear of calories. And I used to think that for the rest of my life, I had to have that almost that budget mindset, that thing of efficiency, getting as much as possible out of it. And I used to think I could just hack my hunger by volume eating. But again, like I've spoken about this in a previous episode I did on filler foods and volume eating, it's an incredibly ineffective strategy. When I am eating more energy dense foods, I feel more satisfied. I don't think about food all the time then. So I think this is a thing as well, like making peace with calories in a way.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because I experienced something very similar where calories they used to be the enemy. They used to be the one thing to burn and restrict and have as little as much as possible. And now it kind of turned 180 degrees to more like, okay, this is actually keeping me alive. If I eat enough of it, I'm satisfied. I can continue, I can move on with my day, and I have the energy to work and play with my son and go work out if I want to. And yeah, this is like a huge shift from fear towards, hey, this is actually my friend. Just a quick example is, I don't know if it's a California rule, but a lot of menus have calories included, and that used to be the biggest trigger for me. Just seeing the calories and then choosing what is have the lowest calories was kind of a natural thing for me. And now, instead of being able to look at the menu and saying like, hey, that's actually something I really like to eat and that sounds delicious, and now it's kind of the opposite. And I learned this, I kind of copied this from my husband and his friends, who basically looked at the menu and were like, oh no, this doesn't have enough calories. I'm going to be starving after this. Like, we have to add something on. They used it as a tool to gauge, am I going to be satisfied? Am I going to be satiated afterwards? Just the big shift from like calories becoming more a friend than an enemy was big for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's another area where people confuse being in recovery with being recovered, because obviously, or being in your eating disorder versus being recovered. Because obviously during my eating disorder, I mean, I was starving. So if I had something really energy dense versus something low energy, I kind of felt the same. So I assumed that, well, I'm going to think then how to get as much as possible out of my calories, because my body didn't yet trust me to send me those cues like, okay, now you've had enough, because I hadn't had enough. I was starving. I couldn't really get enough. So I think this is another thing, that when you become in a better place in your recovery, you will also notice maybe that you're responding a little bit differently to different foods, that you're noticing more like physical satiety, mental satiety from certain foods than what you may be experiencing in recovery. Even though I will say that everyone is different, I also work with clients where even early in their recovery, they notice that, for example, like a high calorie, high fat meal make them feel really satiated. So I want to say everyone is different. But I know for myself, this was like a huge thing that shifted this calorie efficiency mindset. And I think it's such a shame, because I feel like this mindset is so normalized. I see it a lot where high calorie immediately is bad, where it's like, oh, avoid this, avoid that. It's high in calories. Oh, this is one handful of nuts versus one handful of watermelon. It's like, yeah, but if I eat that handful of nuts, I'm going to be satisfied not thinking about food and be okay. If I eat like bit of watermelon, I'm going to be hungry in like 5 minutes. So that's such a nice thing, to have that trusting relationship with my body, and trusting that it knows what it's doing. It knows how to regulate my energy needs appropriately, and that it also knows how to regulate things like my need for carbs and fats and protein. I don't have to like obsess about like, oh, am I getting the perfect balance? I know that if I have a meal that it's a bit lower in fat, I'm probably going to crave more higher fat foods, and vice versa. So not having to like count the macros, because that was another big thing for me during my eating disorder. I was obsessed about getting the perfect macro balance. And now like the thought of like counting my macros just seems so foreign to me.
Yeah, it's something I can relate to, and realizing that our bodies are incredibly smart and have the desire to keep us alive and keep us healthy, and therefore will send us the messages, kind of the signals like, hey, we need more carbs, we need more fats, whatever it is. So just kind of, this is kind of looping back to the trust part too, that, yeah, we don't need to micromanage our bodies.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, there absolutely is some nuance here. For example, some people may be iron deficient and they have to maybe deliberately add in more high iron foods. And some people may be athletes where they have to be a bit more strategic about, for example, adding in some quick carbs right before and after their training. So yes, there is some nuance to this, but as like a general rule, I realized that my body is pretty good at telling me what it needs if I just listen to it.
Yeah, and I think another point is also to realizing that every day looks different, that there's not the same exact thing every day for me. As I said earlier, like our bodies are no machines, like no robots, like they don't count calories in versus calorie out. It doesn't work that way. And everybody has different needs all the time. Even if we both ate the exact same thing every day, would look very different. And probably wanting very different things too. Yeah, so it's important to kind of take a step back from that too. But I think it's important point what you said as well. Like there are different situations in life where we have different needs, and to be aware of them. Like we said with athletes, for example, and pregnancy is a big one too. Like that was a big shift in my life when I was pregnant, to realize, wow, I can actually, my body's asking for crazy things right now, and being okay with it.
And it's the thing of kind of trusting that there could be wisdom to cravings, but also being like, sometimes you just want stuff and that's fine. Like I go through phases where I have a specific food that I'm really into. Like right now, I don't know why, but Kinder Buenos just taste really good to me these days. Like they're just delicious, Kinder Buenos, for some reason. And I don't necessarily know if there's like a vitamin that I need in Kinder Bueno. Maybe not. But it's just more like I have a bit of a thing for it. And then I'll be sick of it probably in like a few weeks. But I allow myself to have it in a consistent way, right? And I think that's the thing as well, rather than being like, no, I can't have Kinder Buenos, and then suddenly I end up binging on the Kinder Buenos. Like I'm fine eating it and having it consistently.
Yeah, I definitely go through those phases too, where I want eggs every day for lunch, and then suddenly I want something else, and it's okay. It's like it's nothing to analyze.
Yeah, I think if we were to like summarize the biggest shifts, I think it would be trust in our bodies, more like doing rather than overthinking and overanalyzing. And also a lack of fear response, because this is a big thing. Like there's a lot of times people will be in recovery and they'll eat, but there still be that fear response. And it's that thing of, well, does that fear response ever go away? And yes, it does, but it doesn't happen overnight. So if you're in recovery and you're doing all the right things and you're feeling scared, that's not a sign you're doing something wrong. Like you, Louisa, mentioned earlier, like that's how you know you're progressing. But you will get a nice future reward, that the fear response is not going to be there constantly over you every time you're around food, every time you're eating something outside of your comfort zone. So I think that would kind of be the key takeaway, that food doesn't become this major source of stress and complication in your life.
Yeah. And that recovery is a temporary state.
For sure. That there is a difference between being in an eating disorder, being in recovery, and being recovered. And even that there is a difference between being in early recovery, mid recovery, late recovery, and a difference between being recently recovered or having been recovered for a few years. It's going to shift and evolve. But what I think we need you to do is to trust the process. I know it's easier said than done, but trying to just sit with the fear and do the things that you need to do still. All right. Thank you so much, Louisa, for joining me. This was such a good conversation.
I love being here. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you found it insightful. And stay tuned, because I hope to get back, Louisa, in not too long for another episode where we plan to talk a bit about how our relationship with movement has shifted and what a healthy relationship with exercise actually looks like after recovery. If you're interested in working with Louisa, head to letsrecover.co.uk and click on coaching. Louisa offers coaching in English and also German. You can follow Louisa at Instagram at recoverywith.louisa. I'll put in link to my website and to Louisa's Instagram account in the caption of this episode. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.